Thank you, Vic. Good morning and welcome to our external engagement panel, The Power of Science and Technology Basic Research Driving American Innovation. Before we start, I'd like to ask board members and other in attendance to turn off your cameras so we can just have our panelists and mute your microphones during the presentation. I'm very excited to moderate today's panel with three esteemed leaders from industry. To frame today's conversation, I want to start with a bold statement. One of America's most treasured collaborations is that between the private sector and our federal agencies, our federal science agencies. These two have shared a long history and a relationship that underpins U.S. innovation, bolsters our national security, drives global markets, and transforms the lives of all Americans. Federal R&D spending peaked at approximately 2% in the mid-1960s, 2% of GDP, and it was fueled by investments in space exploration, defense, and scientific discovery. Today, it's fallen under 1% to about 0.7%, and that's even as global competition has dramatically intensified. The private sector now leads in total R&D spending in the United States and is currently funding nearly the same share of basic research as the federal government. Business makes significant contributions to basic research, especially in areas with clear commercial potential or strategic relevance to their core operations. However, the business sector tends to concentrate its efforts on fields that are more directly aligned with its product portfolio. In contrast, federal funding plays a unique and irreplaceable role in supporting the full breadth of basic science, particularly the long-term, high-risk, and cross-disciplinary research across all fields that private industry can't sustain. Both are reliant on the other to deliver benefits to our country. Our phones, our cars, medical cures, electronic financial transactions, resilient crops, and pest management all started with basic science and technology research, much of it funded by the federal government. This basic research drove breakthroughs that led to a more dynamic, prosperous, safer, and healthier United States. As the board put in its policy piece, Connected Horizons, New Opportunities in a Changed Landscape, which was released almost a year ago, science and technology is the new currency of global power. This currency is dependent on both scientific breakthroughs and innovative technologies and the STEM talent that generates these advances and societal benefits. From graduate students and advanced researchers to the critical skilled technical workforce, the STEM talent that is the heart of our S&T ecosystem at universities, national labs, and industry labs is often educated and trained through federally funded research grants and programs. Today, our panelists will highlight the crucial partnership between the federal government and the private sector to produce and use this basic research that drives American innovation. Collectively, our panelists have stewarded the development of critical and emerging technologies and helped build global companies that have catalyzed trillions of dollars of economic activity. They're well poised to answer all of our hard questions about their sector's current research needs, what's coming around the corner, and what our nation needs to ensure that our STEM workforce is primed for current and future technologies. So I'd like to introduce today's guests. Our first panelist is Dr. A.N. Sreeram, who currently serves as the Chief Technology Officer and Senior VP of Research and Development at Dow. Sreeram joined Dow back in 2006 after holding R&D leadership roles at DuPont, Cookson Electronics, and Sarnoff Corporation. At Dow, he led the adoption of high-throughput technologies to significantly accelerate their R&D process from material discovery and processing through to application development. Sreeram is a Henry Wayland Jr. Award recipient. He holds 20 U.S. patents and serves on the President's Council of Advisors of Science and Technology, or PCAST. He's also an alum of MIT, Alfred University, and IIT Varanasi. Our second panelist is Dr. Bill Daly, the Chief Scientist and Senior Vice President of Research at NVIDIA Corporation, an adjunct professor and former chair of computer science at Stanford University. Prior to arriving at NVIDIA, Bill worked at Bell Labs, Caltech, and MIT, where he and his teams developed technologies that dramatically transformed computing. There would not be an AI industry today without Bill and his researchers' advances in parallel computing systems and GPUs. Among his many recognitions, Bill is a member of the National Academy of Engineering, the recipient of the ACM Eckert Macaulay Award and the ACM Maurice Wilkes Award. He holds over 160 patents and, like Sreeram, also serves on PCAST. He's an alum of Caltech, Stanford, and Virginia Tech. Our final speaker is Dr. Hsieh, the founding managing partner of Matter Ventures Partners, a venture capital fund that backs deep science startups in semiconductors, electrification, advanced manufacturing, AI, and robotics. Previously, Wen spent 17 years at the venture capital firm Kleiner Perkins as a managing partner of both its US and China funds. As an investor, Wen has stewarded companies from their earliest stages to going public, like Bloom Energy and Amprius, or being acquired, like LuxView by Apple. Prior to Kleiner, Wen was a part of McKinsey's Asia semiconductor practice and their North America biopharma sector practice. He's an alum of Caltech. And so with that, we're about to begin. And as a note to the board members, I'm going to kick off with one question at the end of the panelists, but then I'm going to turn to you for more Q&A. Sreeram, we'd love to start with you.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, NSB members. Hope all of you, your colleagues, loved ones are keeping safe and doing great. I just want to open with a few comments on three different themes. A history of innovation at Dow and some history of Dow itself, the importance of STEM and STEM talent in particular, and highlight where the future is headed based on what we see. I'd like to introduce Dow as a 128-year young company. So imagine the year 1897 or any time in late 1800s. If a human got infected with some microbial pest, it was for elderly or for infants and toddlers, it was a near 100% death sentence. And for reasonably healthy people, it was still a 25% death sentence. Our founder, Herbert Henry Dow, found a very innovating way of digging the earth for brine and making a brine well, from brine well using electrolysis or electrochemistry to separate chlorine and bromine out, so that clinics and hospitals of those days could get low-cost, abundant, affordable, and available disinfectant. And that really proved launching of the company. Within 1 year, the product was being sold at scale of that time, as you can imagine, right? So that was the first major innovation and transformation at our founding back 128 years ago. Second was, after World War I started and massive death and destruction, but people realized amongst the military that Air Force is going to be a game changer. And at that time, aluminum through the bauxite process that we know was not invented, was too expensive. So our founders and the research and development worked with the government and was the first one to separate magnesium from salt or seawater, basically, again, using electrolysis. And so that way we have transformed 8 times in our history. And every time it came with tremendous amount of rigor in engineering and science. Why do I say that? To give you an idea, 25 years ago, if you collected a list of top 20 largest chemical companies in the world, today there are only 2, less than a quarter century later, right? So us and BASF, and there are other new companies taking the large position. Many of them do not exist anymore, and some of them who exist are much smaller or in very different forms, right? So it is extremely important when you take a longer time scale, that rigor in engineering and science and applying that to make products that take less amount of resources to make our living standard better. Again, at scale, when I say at scale, at least 5, if not 10% of the human population benefits directly from such products, right? So we went through all of that transformation in our latest form 5 years ago, when there was this Dow DuPont merge and spin. When we spun out, we said, instead of having vision, mission, all these statements, which most companies look the same. Nobody says, I'm going to be number 9 in 20 years from now. They always say number 1. We said we will have an ambition, and that ambition is to be the most innovative, customer-centric, inclusive, and sustainable material science company in the world. And to do that, continuing on rigor in engineering and science is extremely important. To me, law of nature, which is really rigor in engineering science, is the ultimate law, and long-term always wins. And as those in thermodynamics know, that is the law of nature: energy balance, mass balance, and entropy in the universe is always increasing and things like that. No matter what legislators pass in DC or Brussels or Beijing or Canberra, pick your favorite set of legislators, law of nature ultimately wins. And to me, it's the kinetics of how you get to the thermo answer or thermodynamics answer is key. And without rigor in engineering science, just not going to happen, right? So, and we have been hiring incredible talent that the US universities produce. We hire constantly from top 20. When I say top 25, these are in engineering and hard sciences, not overall, including other disciplines, but mainly focused a lot on chemistry and chemical engineering, but also material science, computer scientists and statisticians. And 70+% of our employees in a multi-thousand R&D organization at Dow have PhDs. Yes, we also hire from PhDs from outside the country in our sites. So Dow has over 90 manufacturing sites in over 30 countries. So except Antarctica, we manufacture in every continent, so as to speak. And we hire from everywhere. But we have to be very mindful how we direct all these resources, right? So Ryan mentioned a little bit about high throughput. So what that means is, what is the smallest scale you can bring down an experiment that is reproducible and also reflects what is in real life? Meaning when you go from a few cc, whether it's 1 cubic centimeter or 15, to a 60,000 liter reactor to scale up, are you able to translate that? And second, once that gets into the hands of our customers and consumers, ultimately, like all of us, whether it's a shampoo or dishwashing liquid, laundry detergent, what have you, it should work brilliantly and with no safety issues and sustainability, which I'll hit a little bit. For that, it requires massive engineering and science and rigor there. So we have been able to, yes, make robots making samples, measuring a lot of things, and we probably have about 1,000x improvement in experimental productivity. And frankly, high throughput was started by pharma industry as combinatorial chemistry, lab on a chip, what have you. They went microfluidics, even nanofluidics. The trouble was when you were working with such samples, it didn't translate into real world. So we can do that at real world. And anybody on NSB board or anybody's welcome to visit Dow. I was giving a similar talk to American Chemical Society, and that board did have a visit few years ago. I promise you it'll be worth it and eye-opening.
Thank you, Sreeram.
Thank you. And then, applying those things, not, we're a Midwestern-based company, not to brag too much, but in the last dozen years or so, Dow commercializes between 1,000 and 2,000 new products a year. So I don't want to go into too many details, and many of those are proprietary between us and our customers, but in the last dozen or so years, whether you look at R&D 100 awards or Edison awards for product or new product innovation, Dow has won more than any other company on the planet, almost not just every year, but also cumulatively for the last decade plus. So we are very proud of the talent we have, and it is critical that the federal government funds. Yes, we do fund universities on proprietary research, but there are things we have beam time at Argonne National Labs, Brookhaven National Labs, NIST, not too far from where you are right now for ultra small angle neutron scattering, and so on and so forth. So that is not something private industry can take up. So federal funding there is extremely important. Moving forward.
Thank you, Sreeram. I'm going to actually maybe save just a handful of questions for you and the team at the end.
Sure,
thank
no
you.
Yep.
Right. I'm going to just jump over to Bill, and actually one quick clarification in my maybe energetic introduction to both of them. Sreeram served on PCAST during President Trump's first administration. Bill Daly served on PCAST during Biden's administration, and so both have done public service and really appreciate it. I'm going to hand the mic to Bill, and slides are being controlled on our side, Bill. So we'll jump to you.
Next slide. Yeah. Next slide, please. While Ryan mentioned the funding drop in R&D by the federal government, I think it's actually even worse than that, because I think it's very important to disentangle the R from the D, and even on the R side, the very long range, very speculative R from the R that has much more direct connection to products. So I'm going to tell a little bit about the NVIDIA story, where the real roots of NVIDIA come from government-funded university research. And this really resulted in two things that are directly transferable. Ideas get loaded into people's heads, and that's how you actually transfer technologies, by moving the people who have the technology in their heads. And out of this university came a lot of trained people, which are the graduate students that worked on these projects and graduated and went on to industry. But also out of it came a lot of technology, the know-how about how to build things that work and achieve certain goals. And this gave technology leadership. And I think that the reason why the U.S. is a dominant, country in many different technical fields is because of this pipeline. So we'll go to the next slide. Let me give you the example of how this pipeline worked for NVIDIA. This is my very personal story, but it was a lot of the technology I developed that sort of led to GPU computing and its applications to AI. There was a lot of work funded by DARPA and the Department of Energy back in the 1980s and 90s on the fundamentals of parallel computing, how to build efficient communication and synchronization mechanisms, how to build efficient networks. And then later on in the 90s, I started a DARPA-funded project on stream processing, how to basically break the memory wall by going around it, using kernels and producer-consumer locality. We then applied this technology, which was originally applied to graphics and media processing, to supercomputing under a Department of Energy-funded program. And this directly resulted in the first GPUs with compute capability, the MV50, later announced as the G80. And again, we transfer a lot of this technology with people. Ian Buck, who is the primary developer of CUDA, was a graduate student on the project and moved to NVIDIA, took what he learned developing the Brook language at Stanford and turned that into CUDA at NVIDIA. And this goes on to very successful GPU computing and its application to AI. Next slide. To give you an idea of the technologies involved here are sort of a collection of papers that led into, so we won't go into detail. What you'll see is there are long author lists on each of these papers, and there are actually many papers that came out of each of these projects. And these author lists is really the evidence of workforce development, where many graduate students come, they work on these projects, they learn the technology, and they go off to many places. On the Brook for GPUs, which was the direct transfer from our stream processing into the GPU world. Ian Buck came to NVIDIA. Mike Houston, who's now at NVIDIA, went to AMD and took the technology there. So this technology spreads widely through the graduate students that work on the projects. And the last paper here I just put in there, it's a paper I co-wrote with Steve Keckler and David Kirk, who was my predecessor as chief scientist at NVIDIA, kind of on the history of graphics processing units. And if you want to see more of the details of this, you can find it in there. Next slide, please. So this sort of repeats the first slide of this pipeline from government funding of things that are too far out for me to fund with NVIDIA money. I have a duty to our shareholders to do things that I can see line of sight to NVIDIA benefiting from. But the government funding can involve universities doing things that are further out than that. And then those trained people in that technology can lead to great companies and technology leadership. I showed this National Academy report at the bottom, often called the Tire Tracks report. It gets redone every few years. And there's many stories similar to the NVIDIA story in there that I encourage you to look at. Next slide, please, and final slide. So to summarize, I think that this federally funded university research is critical in that it does the things that are too far out for companies to do, and that plants the seeds for both industrial success and U.S. leadership. It also trains students in key technology areas, building the workforce we need in these new areas so that we can basically build companies and dominate in them. Something I haven't mentioned up till now is that a lot of the graduate students that work on these projects are foreign graduate students. The best and brightest people all over the world have been coming to the United States, attracted to the best universities in the world, and working on the leading research. Many of them then stay in the U.S. and really result in a huge benefit for our country, getting these very smart people coming and contributing to our economy. I will note that we're in an international competition, with many countries, and particularly with China, for both technology and talent. I think in the past we haven't had to worry a lot about the talent. Everybody just came to the U.S. because we were the natural place to go. I think now there's a choice, and the smartest people in various places around the world are considering multiple possible destinations for their education, their ultimate technical career. I think we're clearly ahead right now, at least in the areas that I track in computing and AI. But I think near-peer nations are closing the gap. I think their velocity is higher than ours, and I think action is needed on our part if we want to remain ahead in terms of our economic position and our technology leadership. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. We're going to turn to our final panelist, Wen, and we'll pull up his slides.
Cool. Thank you, Ryan. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. I don't see the slides. Can you guys see the slides?
One sec, when it's coming up.
Okay.
There we
wonderful.
go.
Cool. Well, thank you, Ryan. Really appreciate it. I just want to take the audience through 3 slides. The first slide here introduces my venture capital firm based in Silicon Valley called Matter Venture Partners. We invest in something called hard tech, and you may have heard the word used as deep tech or frontier tech. But since I've been doing it for 20 years, I use the word hard tech to remind ourselves how hard it is to do some of these investments. What is the definition of hard tech? In our view, it's startups with their fundamentals based in hardcore science and engineering. In addition to software, it often involves hardware, which is difficult for a startup to manage. And we like to say it's hard to do, but if you do it right, it's hard to copy. So high barrier to entries. And a few examples of hard tech investments are things in advanced robotics for manufacturing, edge AI chips, satellite communications, next-gen batteries, and so forth. Why is hard tech so important? And for me, that's both very personal and business. I've always believed that political strength comes from economic strength, and economic strength comes from technology strength. And hard tech is the foundation of technology strength and innovation. In slide 2, please. I like to give you some real case examples of companies that I've invested in my 20 years of venture capital that had as its underpinning hardcore technologies enabled by actually initially academic research. So there's 3 examples here. Ambic is a company that was founded out of the University of Michigan, and what it does is it brings ultra low power compute to edge AI solutions. And as we've heard, energy or power is a big problem in the proliferation of AI. So Ambic stands at that forefront of ultra low power for AI compute. The second example is Danger Devices. They're making a next generation of wireless communications that are based on silicon chips, so they can be integrated with other chips in, for example, a mobile device. And the core technology here came from PhD work at University of California of Berkeley. So again, its underpinning was in academia. The third example is Path Robotics. This is a company that allows robots to do welding the ways that humans would do it, but without human intervention. And this technology was inspired by work done at Case Western Reserve University. And it's been quite prominent in our ability to build ships, build data centers, and a lot of the very heavy, laborious stuff that humans don't want to do, or there's not enough humans to do. These 3 examples underpin how scientific research in both academia and industry provide fundamental technologies that allow amazing world-changing startups to come to fruition. With the last slide, I'd like to share with you areas that we're really excited in. I would say there are key trends enabled or accelerated by hard tech. One example is in the area of semiconductors. As we know today, semiconductors drive everything, but there is tremendous potential in areas of advanced packaging, 3D chip stacking, and new materials that allow us to keep on pushing on Moore's Law. The second example is that the blue-collar labor shortage is actually here to stay. And the way that we can address that is we can create robotic solutions enabled by advancements in hardware, software, and AI that can work hand in hand with our skilled workforce to address this prudent labor shortage that exists today. And the third example I'd like to talk about is Gen AI. Well, we've seen that Gen AI is a fantastic, great leap forward, but there are areas there that still need breakthroughs, such as in power management or in networking. And we're working on solutions in those spaces. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip the last 3 macro trends, but you can see for them yourselves the need for onshoring and friendshoring of manufacturing, the fact that electrification, both stationary and mobile, is everywhere. And of course, life science is digitizing and automating, especially when you combine it with life science. In closing, I like to say that I would like to emphasize 3 key points. 1, research is extremely important to driving innovation in the private sector. In fact, the private sector is a great source of startups for the venture capital industry. Number 2, federally funded research is an important part of our research ecosystem. Research shouldn't just be funded by commercial entities, but the government-funded research is an extremely important component that is deeply valued. And the third is, look, we need to train a U.S. workforce of skilled researchers and technicians to maintain our leadership in the global world. And we can source this talent both from internally as well as internationally, because our universities and our research institutions are the best in the world. With that, I thank you for your audience, and Ryan, I hand it back to you.
Amazing. Thank you, Wen, and thanks to our exceptional panelists for sharing their data and insights. And all the slides are going to be available to the board members, and a video of this whole panel will appear on NSB's website afterwards. So with Q&A, I'd like to ask my fellow board members to turn on their videos and raise your hand as you have questions. And I'm going to ask the first one, which maybe I'll start with you, Sreeram, but the question is for all of you, is what is the nature of the global competition you face today, and what does it look like for your industry in particular? And so, Sreeram?
Thank you, Ryan. So there is a war on talent. I mean, it's not new. So the best of the best, as Bill and Wen mentioned, they come to the US to get their doctoral studies. And whatever in the STEM hard sciences field that we look at, 40 to 45% of them do not have a US citizenship, and they come to Dow in similar proportions, and we've been successful in getting all of that. So that fight for talent is extremely important for us to win. And the second is making sure where you are going to put your next big capital investment, whether it's a data center for other companies or a fully integrated polymer manufacturing plant, which could run into several $1 billion, really depends on which country has red tape and which country has red carpet. Guess where the capital is going to go, right? So it is a global competition. But for the shale oil and gas mini revolution in North America, our North American assets are the lowest cost when you take the fully integrated thing. But that you can lose pretty quickly with the wrong energy policy or other countries being heavily incentivized to fund more fundamental research, just as mining left first, heaviest of the heavy industry, metallurgy leaves second, and polymer had pretty much left, but a dozen years ago it stayed because of wonderful horizontal drilling and what. So that is what is most important, fighting for the best talent and where to put our capital. Thank you.
Yeah, so in my industry, it's a little bit different. We're fighting for being the dominant AI platform and for having the dominant computing technology. And that requires basically staying ahead of the competition in a world where things move extremely quickly, where what 5 years ago was the best computing platform on the planet now is scrap because it is so uncompetitive that you couldn't give it away. The total cost of ownership would be higher giving away a 5-year-old GPU than it is buying a new one today at list price. And critical to that is making sure we have an adequate workforce to develop these. It's also making sure that we have an open playing field to sell them all over the world. Recent export controls have done the U.S. a grave harm in giving Huawei basically a clear field and lots of Chinese programmers who have nothing else to use, so they'll program Huawei GPUs, and have actually made our Chinese competition much stronger than they would have been had those export controls not been put in place. I think people misunderstood the situation, and the policy was actually very harmful to the U.S. So I think we want to maintain technology leadership, and to do that we need to be the dominant platform so that everybody is buying American-made compute to do their AI development on.
Thanks, Bill. Wen?
Yeah, there's a statistic which I've read before, and I'm trying to recall it, but apparently, according to the San Francisco Bay Area Council, it said that 45% of Bay Area tech startups have foreign-born founders. And that's just founders. Of the workforce, apparently 2/3 are also foreign-born. So you can see from the startup ecosystem here in Silicon Valley, attracting the best talent globally and making sure they stay and contribute to our technical ecosystem is the absolute lifeblood of innovation here. And, not just that, a lot of the companies that we see are actually outside the US. Israeli companies, after a certain stage of funding, actually come to Silicon Valley to seek funding and to set up an office here, as do startups from Europe. And prior to the current of geopolitical tension, even Chinese companies came over to set up shop. So I think we need to do as much as possible to continually have Silicon Valley and the rest of the United States, centers like Boston and Austin and Seattle, be the hub of talent globally. And we should not just attract them, but more importantly, retain them, and then create a fostering environment where they can be productive and contribute to our local technology and economy.
I'm going to give the next question to our acting chair.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you all. This was fantastic, wonderful. Got a question for you all on talent. Here at NSF, we have these GRFPs, Graduate Research Fellowship Programs for U.S. citizens. We could only fund 2,000 last year, but we had demand for anywhere between 16 and 18,000. So I'm not asking you to fund them. That'll be another time in another place. But what I would ask you to consider is, with that demand that we have for graduate students, domestic graduate students, I think we have to be clear about the narrative. So I'm going to ask you this question, particularly Bill. You talked about let's getting the best foreign talent available, but at the same time, I'm competing against foreign competitors. How do we also get the message out that we are seeking the best domestic talent? Because when it comes out that saying, we're seeking the best and brightest foreign talent, there is an implied, not saying that you're doing it, there's a message that the talent in the United States is inferior. Now, if that's true, I would like to hear that. Or is it that what we need to do as a board and as a country is to nurture that? And I'll just put one more thing before you reply. I'm a product of the space race. So yes, I'm an OE. So some money were put into the public schools and other systems in the 60s to get people into STEM because we wanted to beat the Soviets to the moon, which we did. And then that kind of urgency erased in terms of young men and now young women getting involved into STEM. And we see this in terms of our National Center on Engineering and Applied Statistics. How do we change that message that gets more and more of our own youth involved in STEM so that you have just as many applications from abroad, but you have just as many domestically coming in, and changing that message, and that we're going out to all of the schools possible to tap that talent base?
Yeah. Well, let me observe that I think there are smart people all over the world and roughly in the same proportion. And, we have 300 some million people in the US against 7 billion globally. So there are more smart people overseas than there are here. And I think we want to get the best and brightest worldwide here. Focusing on the domestic talent, I agree that we have a pipeline problem. And I think there are numerous origins for the pipeline problem. One is that US citizens can get a really nice high-paying job with a bachelor's degree. And therefore, many of them end their education there because they don't want to take, the sacrifice of, 5 years at a, graduate student stipend, when, they would rather be, making an industrial salary and therefore drop out of the pipeline after the bachelor's degree. I think a lot of them also don't go into STEM fields because, it is not seen, when they're making the decision of direction to go as lucrative a direction as going into other fields. Although, one thing I observed during my years as faculty at Stanford was that Stanford undergraduates seemed to be very coin operated. I hate to say that. During the time they felt they could make their fortunes, in hedge funds, they were all majoring in economics, and economics was the most popular undergraduate major. Once a bunch of their classmates showed that you could be a millionaire before you were 30 by starting a software company, computer science became the most popular undergraduate major. And so I think that natural forces will tend to push these students. But I think the pursuing a doctorate has to be made more attractive if you want domestic students to make that sacrifice of 5 years of being out of an industrial job.
Hey, Bill, I will just tell you, there was a discussion yesterday that the National Academies with the president of the University of Maryland, Darrell Pines, and we were talking about reimagining graduate education. And one of the things was, if you believe graduate education really roughly hasn't changed in the past 100 years, was to maybe change the dissertation requirement to a startup. So putting together a startup would be a dissertation, because that only involves the research of the technology that's underway, but it also involves research adjacent to that, which is non-technical, but you've got to understand cash flow and these things. So to your point, yes.
Wayne or Sreeram, anything to add on? Yeah, go for it, Wayne.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add is, the rigor in engineering and science, solving partial differential equations and all, has to be at the universities. It becomes much harder. I mean, there are exceptions to everything. Much harder to do so once you start working in an industry, right? So, and of course, you have no prayer in academia to become a professor if you have not had rigor. So I would say, I would still say, yes, we have 300+ million population, but NSF has data parsed quite well. The first generation, or the sons and daughters of the first generation immigrants, are pursuing PhD at a fairly large percentage than the national average too. So we have to tap all that pipeline. A lot of Midwest talent has not been tapped, even though lots of national labs are in the Midwest, right? So there is enough natural talent, but many people also, social pressure, being on social media and looking good on TikTok is quite an adrenaline rush to teenagers versus doing, being in a physics or chemistry or some form of a robotics lab, although Force Robotics and others are doing a great job. And we also, as a corporate sponsor, so you have to catch them at elementary school level. If you're relying on their, upper secondary, high school level, it's already too late. Thank you.
Yeah, I like to reiterate what Bill said about talent, domestically and internationally. It's and, not or, okay? In no way is our domestic talent inferior to international talent. I would say that the level of creativity and thinking out of the box of our domestic talent is actually superior, in my experience, to the international talent. The problem is we don't have enough of them. And as was said here, I think it's a pipeline problem. How might we address that? I think there are some hard things we can do, and there's some soft things, right? I think for young people, particularly if you're in middle school or high school, you want to have idols that you can look up to. And the good news is that Bill's colleague, Mr. Jensen Huang, I think has made being a hard tech CEO or semiconductor CEO quite popular. He seems to have a large fan base and potentially a lot of followers wherever he goes. So I think stuff like that is extremely helpful for young people, that they have role models they can look up to who are charismatic, successful, and can point to clear impacts that they're making on society. Number two, to do a PhD is a long-term economic commitment. And the economic commitment may not be in the tuition, but in the economic opportunity cost. We'd love to see something like an ROTC program for graduate students, for undergrads. If you focus on a few, hard tech subjects in science or engineering, and you're, top of your class, perhaps there is a tuition waiver down the road, or some, career guarantees that you have coming out of it, so that the opportunity cost of spending so much time investing in yourself is not too expensive. And then I go back to the way we teach students. I think that pure academic research, unless you're doing pure sciences, it is not that productive. I think that engineering programs should involve a stint in companies, whether they're startups or big companies, so that we can produce engineers that are productive from as soon as they graduate. And therefore, that will also shorten their time to economic returns and the feeling of benefit of the hard work and time they've put in. These are just some examples and thoughts that we've kicked around here at Matter Venture Partners, and also I've heard being shared in the hard tech industry here in Silicon Valley. But I think there's no time better than now to make getting into STEM as a young person, to making a commitment in the hard tech practice industries, an attractive thing for young people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Wen. The next question is to my colleague, Julia.
Yeah, thanks very much. And thank you for your comments. to a large extent, you're preaching to the choir. We've spent a lot of time thinking about talent, beginning actually pre-K through 12, but also on up through the PhD and beyond. And, that's one area where I think perhaps the, captains of industry, if you like, and the board might be able to make common cause and do a better job of crafting the arguments and identifying the stakeholders that we need to really convince of the need for systemic change. And I would assert it goes way below the graduate level if we're really going to address that problem. It was also, I think, music to our ears to hear you, without exception, talking about the importance of federally funded discovery research, which is, unfettered in a clear way from, some product line, even if that connection is vague. That is not an argument that I have been hearing from other places besides the Science Board and NSF, and I'm wondering if you have suggestions on how we can get, industry and the private sector's voice heard better in terms of that importance, because it does feel like the focus these days is very much on the technology, the current hot technologies, and not the technologies after next whose identities we don't even know yet.
Yeah, well, I think, as I said, in my presentation, it's valuable for industry to look at our history and use that as a predictor of what future industry will be. And so I think if we look back at things that are in the Tire Tracks report and at NVIDIA's personal history, and I think for a lot of leading tech companies, you can find similar things, you'll see that there were ideas that were considered far too speculative at the time for industry to invest in, that it took academic research to push forward to the point where the risk level was lowered low enough that industry said, yeah, we can make a business out of that. Because until you get to that point, industry is not going to do it. And that's the reason why you need that government-funded academic research, because otherwise those technologies will not mature. They'll take much longer to mature than they otherwise would.
I think from the startup landscape, when we have successes, we tend to just focus on the commercial phase of that success. I think we don't go far back enough to talk about the origin story, the federal funding, the research in the lab, the more humble academic beginnings. I think in many of our successful startup cases, if we can do a bit more of that, I think there'll be a voice and an example that people can latch on to follow the full life cycle.
Thank you, Wynn. Thank you, Bill. Suresh, next question. And then Suresh, Marvi, then Willie.
First of all the panel, thank you very much. So you all come with a different perspective about that science and technology. As an immigrant, I really enjoyed walking into American S&T infrastructure. So all of you enjoyed to develop new technologies too. So from your perspective, our current S&T infrastructure, is it good? Needs improvement? If it needs improvement, how can the private sector and government can work together to get it to the next step? Can you talk about that, your thoughts on that?
I can start. We have been partnering with the U.S. government for over a century now, right? So it's ups and downs, and it goes in cycles. We felt going back about 6-7 years ago, the administration, as in president's cabinet members, are more open to industry and are listening to it more and more. But that also needs to follow by actions, right? So it's easier to chase what is hot now, as mentioned by other panelists, but you really have to step back. What is the fundamental singular thing that is so critical to improving our living standards, safety, and prosperity? It's energy. It needs to be abundant, affordable, and really available all the time. It's reliability. Yet so much funds have been misappropriated by federal government into not taking that 20, 30, 40-year view. And so much so that, for big data centers, gigawatt type, Microsoft is paying Constellation Energy to restart reactor number 2 at the 3 Mile Island. We should never have stopped nuclear research. I don't want to preach to the choir here because you all know that. So you need to get the energy policy right and all the supply chain issues right. I just skipped over quickly mining left. So all the rare earth magnets, the more powerful magnets on electrification and everything else, whether it's an individual battery, EV, electric vehicle, to electrifying, big stuff. You need those kinds of magnets. Well, they're no longer mined as much anymore here. And as far as mining goes, it's directly proportional to the size of the country. The rare earth is not that rare. US is a pretty large country, and we would do mining much cleaner for the environment than anywhere else, right? So these fundamentals cannot be ignored. Or the industry is going to find a way, like I said, red carpet versus red tape, right? So getting that right and consistently, we have been through half the US presidents in our company history, right? We will survive, but it's also because we are very global. So I'll stop here and let others comment. Thank you.
I think that our infrastructure is pretty good, but could be made a lot better. And if I look at the information technology side of things, I'll point to a couple points of concern. First of all, there are a lot of breakthroughs happening in AI now, and many of them are happening in industry rather than in the university. And this is not because the people in the university don't have the best ideas. I think they do, but they're lacking in critical resources of having adequate compute and access to data. And the National AI Research Resource, if I get that right, the NARE, was supposed to fix that, but then despite everybody being very enthusiastic about it, never happened. And so I think we need programs like the NARE. And I also see an alarming trend of a brain drain in these areas going from universities to companies. And I guess I'm an example because I did it, where because the resources aren't available in the universities, people go to companies where they can get the resources. And then this leaves us with the concern about who's going to educate the next generation. And are we going to be able to continue this pipeline of great ideas maturing in the universities that ultimately make their way to industry? And then finally, I think in certain areas that we deem as strategic, like semiconductors, I think we really need to have a push for workforce development where we make sure that academic labs are adequately equipped and that faculty are trained to then in turn train the workforce. The CHIPS and Science Act had a bunch of things we're supposed to do that, and Lisa Su and I chaired a PCAST report on the topic, but I think not nearly enough is done identifying strategic areas and having the government collaborate with the universities to make sure that we are doing workforce development in those areas and making sure that the universities are positioned to continue our nation's technology leadership.
Thank you, Bill. I know, Brian, you wanted to add something real quick.
I just wanted to make a clarification. The National AI Research Resource is definitely happening. We've funded over 450 research projects. We're represented in 48 states, and we're definitely mentioned in the National AI Roadmap. So just I want to make sure it's clear we are moving out on the NARE. We are looking to scale it up in the future, and we have lots and lots of corporate partners. So just to be clear about that point. Thanks.
Thank you. Marvi.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. The very exciting topics and an amazing panel. So in regards to fueling the pipeline of technology development, so we talked a lot about workforce development, and perhaps we also touched on just now on some important policies to fuel that. When said before that economic development is fueled by technological development, and both of those actually, kind of like create a powerhouse for political power, basically internationally. And so my question to you is, and I want to close this question down to, we've talked about really big policies, right? But think about questions of what can an agency like NSF can do, right? So let's make it maybe a smaller boundary condition there on what can NSF do to make sure that the U.S. is positioned in a way that is positive, right, for the future of the country and for the welfare of people. And then maybe, in regards to NSF, what can the government do to help the agency to fuel that technology pipeline?
Yeah, well, to grab a term from Sreeram, I think the NSF could help a lot by having more red carpets and less red tape. At PCAST, we actually had a study group, and we did not produce a report, although a number of us were talking about publishing our findings in some academic publication, looking at how to revitalize the United States scientific research endeavor. And a big finding we had is that the average principal investigator spends 47% of their time on administration, which includes writing the proposals, writing progress reports, dealing with all of that. And there are many good models coming, for example, from some of the philanthropic organizations that fund science, where they simply identify good people and give them money and get out of the way. So that instead of 47%, perhaps it's 2%. And so I think if we could, this would be a huge increase in research productivity if we could free that 47% up for innovation rather than administration. And so that's something NSF could do, is streamline the processes so that the innovators spend their time innovating.
I think one area that the NSF could do a bit better is when you receive applications, encourage the principals who apply for the NSF grants to talk about commercial value and not just scientific value. I think it's an and, not a or. I don't say this to mean that we shouldn't just do pure scientific research, but I think that lens of how it's ultimately going to translate into something useful, be it science, engineering, societal, I think that's a very important criteria that you should use to help filter. And again, you should manage a portfolio of different research, not just stuff that goes purely commercial. But I think the commercial lens is important in this time and age, and maybe even sort of national strategy lens too, right? We talked a bit about semiconductors. I think there's a lot of people who are in computer science who know how to code for chips. There are fewer people who know how to design chips, and there are even fewer people who know how to develop the processes in a fab to make the chips. With such priorities or identified gaps, maybe NSF can use some of that as a filter or lens on which how you allocate your resources over time.
Just two quick things. Those are great comments by both Bill and Wen. Make the proposal limit as 1 page or something. And on commercial side, have an industry partner saying that if this basic research is successful, we as a US-based company or operating in the US are going to commercialize it upon XYZ of key success factors. That will tremendously improve, and we can help reduce bureaucracy. Large companies do have some bureaucracy, but it's pikers compared to the government and national labs, right? And when I was in PCAS, in fact, young investigators were spending 90% of their time writing proposals for funding, not 47%. And the other thing I would add is that the data that was shown or shared before, 16 to 18,000 applicants for PhD in STEM for NSF, only 2,000 funded. Find a way to double or triple that within 5 years, because that also hits the domestic talent that was mentioned before. Thank you.
Thank you, Sreeram. We've got a few questions, so if the questions can be quick and maybe just one reply from our panelists. Willie, please.
I was having a conversation. I don't think so.
Here we go.
I was having a conversation with a professor at Lehigh University the other day, and his premise was that in academia, too often now we are training students to be clones of ourselves rather than what industry needs. And he is actually convening a meeting at the National Academy of Sciences. It's the National Workshop on the Formation of Industry-University Partnerships for Doctoral Training. That is to involve industry more into establishing projects for universities to grant PhDs. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that and whether you think that would be something that's needed or viable.
Yeah, I think academics tend to all want to make clones of themselves. So they train their graduate students to be like themselves. But it tends to cancel out because as fields, come and go, the proportion of people in the academic world in those fields comes and goes. And so we tend to be training doctoral students, probably lagging the real need by 5 to 10 years, but not by a whole generation. I would be concerned if there's too much focus on industry, pushing the definition, that it will tend to pull in the research horizon. I think it's good that the research is, related to industry and not simply, something that, although we need some curiosity-driven research as well. For economic development, there has to be a line of sight to how this turns into a new industry, into competitive products. But I think if we pull it in too close, it's going to be replicating the research we're already doing in industry and not doing those things that the universities can uniquely do.
Thanks, Bill. One quick question. One for you. Yep.
Yeah, Bill, can you hear me? So Bill, you just popped something in my head about faculty and connecting with workforce. It seems to me something that when we talk about workforce, we're talking about training students. It hadn't occurred to me till you really made this connection with faculty and industry. So what you're saying, there's open territory or ground for industry and NSF to work collaboratively with faculty as well. And send my regards to Chris Malachowski. So this is good. That's what I'm hearing, right?
That's right. I mean, a great example is when we developed CUDA in 2006, my predecessor, David Kirk and Wenmei Hu of the University of Illinois went out and taught a bunch of Teach the Teachers courses where they taught faculty around the world GPU computing so that the faculty could then teach their students. And it was tremendous leverage so that if you teach the faculty, then you get this amplifying effect of them teaching many students for each faculty member you train. And I think it's important in new technology areas to build a workforce to basically take the faculty we have and get them able to train the students to be the workers we need.
Thank you, Bill. Wanda, last very quick question.
Very quickly. Thank you, Ryan, and all the panelists for your excellent comments today. But I especially want to thank Wen for the almost prescient comments that you and others made about the criticality of societal benefits, the ultimate downstream benefits of what all of this work does. And we're just about to release a report, Commission on Merit Review, which I co-chair and Julia Phillips vice chairs. And we speak quite a bit about the importance of societal benefits. You also mentioned the criticality of portfolio building and assessment. And we're also spending a lot of time in that report talking about transparency and accountability to all stakeholders. So again, thank all of you, but that really hit home.
And with that, thank you so much for this energetic conversation. It's clear we could go on for another hour or two easily. And to our esteemed panelists, your data, insights, comments, I mean, on this nationally significant topic has been invaluable. We really, really appreciate it. It's going to guide the work that we do to strengthen the collaboration between government, business, and research institutions. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, the board has a long-standing interest in public and private partnerships and this enduring relationship between federally funded R&D and the private sector. Last summer, the previous board chair, Dario Gil, and Microsoft's vice chair and president, Brad Smith, began a project to pull together a coalition of the leading innovation-driven American companies to support federal agencies that sponsor this fundamental research that's the bedrock of our national innovation ecosystem. And that's everyone from NSF, NOAA, DOE, NIST, and DARPA to contribute to a strengthening the domestic science and technology workforce. One thing I'm excited to do right now is announce the formation of this new group called the Strategic Business Task Force on U.S. Science and Technology. It's co-led by Microsoft, and as part of the group is made up of Andreessen Horowitz, Cargill, Dell Technologies, Dow, Ford, Lockheed Martin, and MasterCard, rounding out the founding members. And in the coming days, there's going to be a press release with more details, but the board really does look forward to strengthening our ties with our colleagues in industry in the months and many years ahead. So thank you so much, Sreeram, Wen, Bill, and team. Back over to you, Vic. Thank you.
Let's please give a round of applause to our guests.